one else was in.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. So, but it says meeting.
Hmm.
Y'all see that? But I know people are able to get in because I see them. Like I see participants,
Oh,
Yeah,
they're coming in.
but I don't see a way to let them in.
they're in.
They're in already, I think.
Okay. All right then.
Put a little message in the chat.
Okay, good.
Thank
That's very
you.
exciting. Thank you guys.
Hi, just out there.
I know. All righty. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So it might look a little strange on camera because I have my screen over to the other side, so I'm kind of looking away. But I am. Let's see. I would like to, as y'all are looking at it, are you seeing the menu?
You want to know if the participants are seeing the menu?
Yeah, because I don't really like that. Um, it let me move it to my other screen. I kind of panicked for no reason.
Yeah, they can.
Okay.
I don't believe I know what you're talking about, that little thing that's hovering there, but I think it's okay.
Yeah. Um, I tried moving it off, so hopefully it disappeared for everybody. All right. So I want to get started on time because there's a lot of information. And I want to respect everybody's time. I appreciate you being here. My name is Heather Stobbs. I am a customer success specialist with Reflection Sciences, and I am a recently retired early childhood instructional specialist. Before that, I was in the classroom and I taught a smidge of first grade and then kindergarten for quite a few years, and then um, self-contained ECSE, and then I was the pre-K teacher and the special education teacher for an inclusive pre-K classroom. So that is my experience in a nutshell. We are going to talk today about using executive function skills to tackle the challenging behaviors that you see in early childhood. What we're going to go over is just real quickly the three components of executive function. What is a challenging behavior? I'm going to give you some strategies that are best practice and must do's in a classroom, especially an early childhood classroom. And then we're going to talk about next steps. So, the three components of executive function, these are the larger pieces of the system in your brain that is the air traffic controller that directs you to use executive function skills in your everyday life. So it is for adults too. We're not born with these skills. These are skills that have to be taught. We are born with the capacity to learn these skills. So the fancy words for the components are inhibitory control, which is being able to ignore distractions, being able to keep yourself from responding to things very impulsively, like paying attention to a teacher. It includes it includes being impulsive in your actions, but also verbally impulsive. So let's say that you're in the middle of a lesson and you're teaching and you have a child that's continually um, shouting out, which I'm all about conversation and building language in kids with students, but there does become a time, especially if they're not talking about what you're talking about, that it can become disruptive in your classroom and it makes it difficult. The next step is working memory. So, where you see this in an early childhood classroom is really whether they can follow the like the steps of a process. So, you know how some students can do one step instructions, two-step instructions, and then three steps. They can hold the directions or the steps in their head for the amount of time that it takes to do it. It's also when they can generalize it into other settings. For example, I know that when I'm in this classroom with this teacher, that these are her expectations and I understand what to do. It's different when we go to the playground. At the playground, I can be yelling at the top of my lungs and doing all that kind of stuff. So it's even being able to modify your behavior in different circumstances, which requires the next piece, which is cognitive flexibility, which is thinking about something in multiple ways. So, considering someone else's perspective or a different way to solve a problem. In an early childhood classroom, you often see this in the form of a child with an underdeveloped uh, skill of cognitive flexibility would be one that wants to only do things a certain way, is very rigid. Suggestions that might make it easier, they won't even take those into consideration. So these are all functions that you have the capacity to learn, and people's strengths are different in different areas. So continue on. So those three components that I just went over, the cognitive flexibility, inhibitory control, and working memory, those are the pieces of the actual executive function in your prefrontal cortex. Having those skills or having those pieces then allows you to actually build the skills and use the skills in life. So these skills that we are teaching um, explicitly with our pre-K classrooms, like in our early childhood classrooms, it is so important at that time because that is a huge opening for learning these skills. There's prime times throughout a person's life that they have the ability to learn these skills. And one of the biggest times of growth is between like 3 and 6 years of age, which falls right into the students that you guys work with. And if you are, like, let's say you're a coach or a specialist, it's really good to have a knowledge of these skills and what you see in the classroom, because very often what is perceived as challenging behavior or misbehavior is really the fact that the child doesn't have a specific skill. So, having the capacity to learn these skills leads you to be able to operate with the executive function skills that you see here on this chart. So it involves planning, organization, self control, task initiation, time management, metacognition, which is really reflecting and thinking about your own thinking, working memory, attention, flexibility, and perseverance. And I love this picture that is here because I found this. This is actually from the Harris County Public Library's site, and I just was looking for images of children collaborating and working together. And so I did a search on that, and I found this one. And what I really like about it, I was talking about with Renee, is you can tell from this picture that they worked together, they planned it out, they organized their play. Okay. So they put all these pieces into place. They coordinated on how to solve the problems and fix issues that may have come up in their building. And then I see this little guy in the middle, and I can't really tell what his intention is just from this picture. So when I looked really closely at it, I looked at his foot. And I don't know about you guys, but after 30 minutes and 30 minutes, 30 years in education, there's two things. Either he really helped build it and he's stepping over perhaps to help the other child, or he's about to destroy it. And we don't know which one it is because we don't know what happened after this picture was taken. But you can tell with all the work that's gone in, there's a lot of planning and detail. They even have like the little bears in there, right? And what looks like kind of a bridge at the front. So I don't know what it was they were building, but I do know from looking at the picture that these children have some of these executive function skills already. They're already in place. One thing that I wanted to mention is that there's a lot of talk around executive function and executive functioning skills because they're an important layer to academics and to social emotional learning. It really depends on when you do research on it, what your source is. So, for example, on this image that I have for you guys, there's 10. And you might find one that has 8. You might find one that has 12. The reason why that is because there's just different categories and ways to explain things. So it really depends on where you have the resource from. Don't get locked up in that because when you break down all the different ones that you see, for example, a lot of them show prioritization as a skill. And that is because that's just being able to put your big rocks first. So we all know that that's a skill, but it could also fall under organization. It could also fall under planning. So it really depends on the resource and what they decided to put in there. So don't get stuck on that piece. Our next piece is what is challenging behavior. So it really does depend. What I would like you to do if you are able, is go into the chat and I want you to just kind of list the things that are triggers for you. What are behaviors that you see in the classroom that trigger you, that make you have a reaction? And this can be a reaction that you've really worked on over the years so that you're more taking a pause, or a reaction that's still just like when a kid does it, it's like fingernails on the chalkboard for you. So if you guys could go ahead and put in the chat some of the things that, yeah, that's one. um, yeah, hitting is a big one. And the absolute, like just defiance or talking back, that's destroying things, hitting. I know that now I see a lot more destruction of entire classrooms, like just ripping things off the wall and flipping furniture and stuff like that. So, so I think it's fair to say that one of the issues that we are seeing in early childhood and in schools in general is that not only are more kids exhibiting what we see as misbehavior or challenging behaviors, uh, it's more kids and they seem to be escalated in the amount that they do. So I want you to kind of think for a moment about shifting your view from the misbehavior into their missing skills. So when you look at each of these images, like what do you feel when you're looking at these? And how would you begin an interaction with, oh, I have a typo, sorry, within each setting? So, how would you start that interaction with a child in each of the settings. So reflect on that for a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and share what it makes me think of, like what my initial reaction is when I see them, and then what teaching opportunity I have or what interaction I need to begin with. So our little uh our little cutie on the right, I mean on the left there, she's looking at an alphabet poster, and the images that are represented on the poster are animals that begin with that letter sound, right? So as she's looking at that, what I could do as an instructor is I could just go over and ask her what she's doing. She'll tell me what her thought process is. And then we could talk about like, okay, so I see a lion. Who else in our classroom has a name that starts with O, like in lion, right? You would focus on the things that have to do with literacy. So she might have some missing skills on, maybe she says that Susie, starts with O, like lion, and it provides you an opportunity to then give some instruction, right? On the next one, the child is like sorting the colors, and she's building what it looks like little houses to me, or towers. But if you notice, she has several of them already done, and they're coordinated. However, when you look at that very last one, they're not coordinated. So you kind of have to like appraise the situation. Are they not coordinated because there's no more purple bottoms, or there's no more yellow tops? Because the one in her hand, she has like the orange top and the green bottom. You kind of have to investigate, know the child, and know what's going on, or you can start the interaction. Okay. So she might be missing some skills in one area or the other. Maybe you've been working on shapes, and you ask her like what the different shapes of the objects are, or what she notices that's the same or what's different. It's a teaching opportunity. So on this last one, it's a it's a child who looks upset. The teacher looks either shocked or panicked, and something needs to happen in this situation, right? You know that you're going to have to intervene and have a reaction in this situation. What I want to point out, though, is that just like the child with the letters and the child with the blocks, this child has skills that are missing. Very often, it's stuff that we don't want to deal with because it is outside our comfort zone. And this missing skill seems so much more severe than a missing skill of a child with blocks, or a missing skill of a child in literacy, because this last one is the one that disrupts things that are going on in the classroom. All right, so I looked at several sources as I was building this PD, and these were listed as challenging behaviors in preschool. So I kind of took a conglomeration of them. And what I'd really like to address on this piece is there is a reason for all these behaviors. There is a reason why children bite. There's a reason why they throw temper tantrums. There's a reason why they hit. Okay. So in the chat, let's think for a minute, because a couple of y'all mentioned the hitting as an issue, as something that triggers you. So could you put in the chat with hitting why a child might hit another child or the teacher? Why might a child do that? What is the cause of the hitting that you've seen? difficulty regulating emotions, does not know how to express needs and wants, lack of impulse control. Guys are good. Y'all are good. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. So, as I'm looking at this, like for example, with biting is very often a reaction that a child gives when when they lack communication skills. Um, Sometimes it's even they want to get somebody's attention because they want to play with them, but they don't know how to initiate an interaction appropriately. That's a skill that has to be taught by modeling and practicing. And when you have your classroom set up and you have routines and procedures in place, and the kids are beginning to know each other, when this happens, there are children in your classroom that are very able to copy the words that you say, right? So when they don't know how to express that, you have to have the knowledge of the child enough so that you know what is actually driving that. Because what is driving that is the skill that's missing. What drives screaming is a skill that's missing. Because, and it can be that very often screaming at home is what gets them what they want. So they overgeneralize and they scream everywhere. They don't they don't have the skill or the understanding that if they ask, like for example, to go to the restroom, if they just come up and say, I need to go potty, or you have a system for that in place, they don't have to be screaming about it all the time. It could be they have an older sibling that the communication at home with the older sibling, because the younger one gets on their nerves, is the older one screams at them all the time. There's reasons for this. One of the big ones that I've seen in the last few years with more and more students is elopement, running from class. They just are avoiding it and getting away. The research shows, however, that one of the things that causes students to elope is they kind of get into a survival mode. And when that happens, there are chemicals that are released with them that they need to use large muscles. And so they run. So I've had students that was getting called out for behavior stuff on, and they would elope. And really, what they needed was a break. And they would go outside and we would talk about, okay, so if you want to run, we're going to run 3 times or whatever. And it would get that feeling out of them. It would allow them to calm themselves a little bit because they were using the elopement as a coping mechanism. And I will say, unresponsiveness is one that is really hard for me. Um, I think that I get triggered from, for example, like at home when I mention something to my spouse and he doesn't acknowledge what I said, it frustrates me. And so it frustrates me in class when there's a child and I reach out to them and try to initiate to them and I get nothing. And I get really, really frustrated. And so rather than walking away, very often I make it worse because I don't let it go. I fall into a habit that I have. So that's all stuff that I need to work on, but this is not therapy for me. But I do think also that the throwing toys, sometimes if you ask a child, why did you throw that? Like right after they do it, instead of like, fussing at them, you just ask out of curiosity, why did they do that? A lot of times it's towards the bucket or the container or towards a trash can. And they're playing, they're seeing if they can like make a basket. That's different than throwing a toy at somebody intentionally because you're angry. That's when you need to dig deeper on that piece. So here's some strategies that that I'm going to share. The reason why I'm sharing these, I'm going to share some that are for a whole group of students because it's a layer that you need to have in your classroom. You need to provide it for all students in your classroom. If you're a campus or a district that uses a tier model, like, all classroom instruction that everybody gets that isn't differentiated or accommodated as tier one instruction, it's pieces for that. And then we'll get into some other pieces. So we're going to go into this with three understandings. The three understandings are that the brain functions optimally when a child feels safe. This is true for adults as well. Sometimes you can get so emotional and overstimulated and stressed that you don't feel safe. And even as an adult, you can't think. It is very difficult to think when you have a lot of stress. So you do calming activities like breathing and all that. The same is true with a child. If a child does not feel safe in a classroom or safe in a group that he's in, you're going to see the child not able to function as well as he could in a safer environment. We're going to remember that all behavior is communication. They are telling you something, whether they're acting out or they have shut down or they're doing just rocking along with the day. It's communication to you. And that building relationships drives willingness. So you are more likely, like I think it might have been Marsha Tate, you're more likely to work with people that you have a relationship with. You're more likely to be willing when there's a relationship built. So, and all these are true throughout life, even the willingness at work. All right. So, these are some routines that go along with the brain functioning when a child feels safe. When you have routines, and I know very often some of these things are non-negotiables or what we call like, must haves, like you have to have a daily schedule posted, right? You need to have your expectations of your different areas posted so that you've gone through them. But what I want to talk to you about is it's not just the posted, it's the teaching of what things mean and the structure of the day. So you can't just have it up with not having teaching with the students of what each thing means. So, as an example, I want to show you this block center one. This is a picture of one that I did in a classroom. As we were going and talking about the block center, as I was introducing things, this is some of the safety things that we came up with, and student input was on this. I did this as a shared writing activity. So it was build as tall as you, because we had had some issues with building super, super tall and they would fall over and hurt people. Is that something you can get rid of as the kids have better skills? Absolutely. But for now, if like if you were doing this at the beginning of the year, this is something that you would go through with them. And the reason why it's a must have is if you do these things with all the kids that you have, right, in your current classroom, when you get a student that very well could throw everything off, because we all know that that happens, you already have students in your classroom that know the routine. They understand the expectations. So all those students are models for the new student that comes in. That's why it's important. So often I would get calls for behavior because, like, behavior was my thing. I would get calls out for behavior with a particular student when in fact, it wasn't really the student. It was kind of like they wanted me to fix what was going on with the student and fix the behavior, but these foundational pieces weren't in place. So there were no child models. And we would have to go back to, I've been in here co-teaching with you. And one thing that I've noticed is you have a schedule up, but we're an hour and a half into the day and you haven't you haven't looked at it. So it has to be used as well. All these things that you're doing to build these routines are getting your students on board with you. You build a relationship with them. They know your expectations. You're very clear. And then you have that creates your models for that kid that might come and throw a monkey wrench into everything. So having a visual schedule is really important. The reason why I chose these three is this is expectations for an area. I did it. I drew it. This isn't, anything that I pre-planned. I didn't have it pre-done. I did a T-chart right in front of them so that they had ownership of it. Um, this one in the middle is using pictures of the actual students. That is something that drives interest and engagement in what it is that you're doing. So it kind of develops buy-in. And when you're doing it consistently and referring to it, they know what to expect. So many of our students don't know day to day, even whose house they're staying in that night. You know, if there's like some custody thing going on, often they don't know who's picking them up, what bus they're getting on. They don't have that information. Everything in their outside of school life is very hectic and chaotic, and they need the safety and security of knowing what's coming during the day. So, like some teachers, when there's a special event, something out of the ordinary, they put like a star or like a question mark, to let the kids know that something special is coming up. And then this other one, so you can do it vertically, like I have in the middle, or you can have it horizontal. This teacher just flips the cards over, and these are just pre-made cards that they have in programs like, oh, I lost it. Symbol Sticks is one. Oh my gosh. Okay, I completely lost it. I cannot remember the name of the program. That Board Maker. There we go. Um, Pictures out of Board Maker, things like that. Am I saying that by using visuals that come out of a special education program means that it's only for use with special education students? Absolutely not. You will find that the strategies that are good for students in special education are actually good for all students. Strategies that are good for students that are learning English as a second language is actually good for all students. Bilingual strategies, all students. So really what is good for the small population can be done with a larger population. All right. So let's say that you have those in place, you have those structures in place, but they're not working very well with maybe a couple of your students, and they need a further breakdown. They need a more detailed set of visuals to help them. This is building their working memory. So having an arrival routine where you have visuals up for what the class needs to do when they get there supports all students, but it also very much supports students that are having difficulty when you use it as a teaching tool. All of these things, all these samples have to be taught. A huge thing for students that are non-compliant is a first then. First, you play with the snap blocks, then you can do the play. And I know that you guys have seen these things. So a first then actually builds executive functioning skills of time management, because sometimes they get involved in the snap blocks and you can give them the warnings about, okay, it's almost time to clean up for lunch. When you're first teaching this and using this, you have to be extremely consistent. And whatever is on the other side, the then piece, once they complete the first piece, they get to do the then piece. You might have to have something in here like you cleaned up for lunch, and when they get back, they can do this. But because they don't really have a concept of time, they can do it for only a couple of minutes, and it satisfies them in what their then piece was. So typically, first, it's kind of like first you have to eat your spinach and then you can have ice cream. It's kind of how it's set up. but it doesn't have to be that way. It can even be first you get your tray and then you eat. First you go to the bathroom and then you wash your hands. You can use it to teach all those pieces in chunks because at the same time you're doing that, you're explicitly teaching executive functioning skills. All right, so the last piece is relationships. And we talked about relationships build the willingness. However, when a child becomes willing to allow you in to work with them, remember that it makes them vulnerable. That's a piece of vulnerability that you have to be very careful not to step on, right? So you don't want for them to have a negative experience after they made themselves vulnerable. They're more likely to shut down. So this teacher here is talking with a student. She's like at her level. She's not standing up above her. She's got her hand on her to offer some support. The student looks a little nervous or upset. Okay. So now you're working to build your relationship with the students. And I know that there are students that their behaviors are very frustrating to you and make you feel like you're very helpless. The tendency is to avoid those students and have like have the administrator come in or have your instructional assistant or teaching partner do most of the work with them because they need more support. It is very important that you're not left out of that process. You need to make sure that you are in that process because what will happen if you're not is an administrator will come in when they're not in control and they're upset, and the administrator calms them because they've built the relationship with them because they've been called in before. And then as soon as that administrator walks out the door, the behavior that you are trying to replace with another behavior comes right back up because their support person left. So when they're calm, you're playing with them, talking to them, building all those positive shared experiences so that when they're upset, they will allow you to help regulate their emotions by modeling breathing for them, to be their co regulator, to provide support because eventually you fade all that. It's not the same as leaving like a baby to kind of like cry themselves out, which is, it's a method or a strategy that people use. It's not like that. If there's a child super upset in your classroom, as long as they are not being physically aggressive and it's a safety issue, there should be an adult over there helping them regulate until they begin to learn how to regulate on their own. At some point, kids become co-regulators to their peers in the classroom because they develop the skill. After you work to build a relationship with them, then you can really start to work on building their relationships with peers. Because biting someone, hitting someone, throwing a toy at someone, those are not things that build positive relationships. Very often, our children with the most challenging behavior are kind of shunned or ignored by other students in the class, or students that have a tendency to be a follower will often begin to participate in the same types of behavior that you're trying to change in a student. So, mediating conflicts between students models for them ways to have self regulation, metacognition, so reflecting and thinking on what happened. It builds their working memory because they have to hold that skill in their head, their attention, their flexibility to see someone else's point of view when they're in conflict with them, and the perseverance to continue on, and play with them again the next day and continue to build a relationship with them. You're the facilitator for this. And this is something that's really important for their future life. Like they need it to get along in kindergarten and early childhood. But when you think about even as they grow up and go to college or get a job and they're starting to work with other adults, if they don't have these kinds of skills with conflict mediation, and being able to self-regulate and not be impulsive and be flexible in their thinking, they're not going to last real long at a job, right? So you are actually building skills for life when you're working on these things. All right. So our takeaways is that missing skills are at the root of most challenging behaviors, and that skill must be taught. Educators take on the role of investigators to figure out what the child's communicating when they exhibit the behavior. The classroom environment should optimally be set up so the development of these skills is embedded in routines. Other ways to do that is having the responsibility of like classroom helpers or jobs or, things like that, so that they have ownership of their classroom and they build autonomy. And building a relationship with a child creates willingness to allow you to teach the child. So those are our key takeaways for today. Um, and before I, officially thank you and ask anybody if they have questions, I want you can take a picture of this so that you know how to connect with us. We're on these different social media platforms. We also have a newsletter that you can subscribe to at the link that is there on the right. So as we wrap everything up, I want to thank you all for joining us today, and I want to ask if you have any questions that you type them in the Q&A, and we can stay on for a little bit and answer questions for you if you have questions. And if you do not have questions, I thank you for your time. And I really, really hope that you look out and are on the watch for other webinars that we are doing in the upcoming months, because they're going to be some good ones. So you're welcome, Jessica. If you don't have questions, then you can go ahead and log out. We really appreciate your attendance, and you guys have a wonderful day. I'll stay on for a few minutes before I close it out. I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share. All right. I'm not seeing any open questions or anything like that. And I see thank yous and I see
Yes,
participants beginning.
lots of great thank yous, Heather. I don't see any questions in the Q&A.
I don't either.
Just appreciate everyone's attendance. That was awesome.
I was so happy, like to see, and I saw Jessica's name and I recognized her name. And I want to say I recognized the last name Lugo as well. I think I saw
Ah,
that one
good.
too. So, all righty, I'm going to close out those questions and answers. You
I'm going to
see
stop
who
the
is
recording.
okay. See who is still on.